So what do we learn in these postmortems? Well, there's a bunch of things we can learn about dealing with clients. First lesson, which I call Welcome to the Client Dance. Frankly, it can get exhausting going from the point where the client showed an initial interest to the point where you can start working on the project in earnest. As a consultant, you start at a disadvantage. The client will, at times, use this as a negotiation ploy to get you to come in at a lower price or to get you to commit to more work than you really wanted to commit to. It's important that you know what you can give and what you are worth. Be firm, you be polite, respect yourself, your abilities, and what you can do. It's true that you need them in order to get paid, but they also need you in order to get the project done. My next lesson is to be careful about scope creep and about expectations that diverge. Perhaps the client starts simply by asking for a little something, which is not explicit in the agreement. It could be something about changing the font size or changing the color scheme. These aren't big things. It should be easy for you to do so. And you'll agree, because why wouldn't you agree to something like this? But perhaps they start asking for something a little different, like they want you to use a slightly different data set than the one you used, because they got new data in the meantime. And they're wondering if we couldn't add this little piece of analysis to it. Again, on its own, it's not a big deal, but if they're asking you to redo the analysis with a different data set, they're really asking you to double the analysis work. Conceivably, by the end of these subsequent demands, you'll have done a whole new project for them, and they will not have had to pay for it. You can leave room in your agreement for modifications, for amendments. But with these amendments has got to come the understanding that you will need to revisit the work plan, both in terms of timelines and in terms of cost. It's normal that the client might want something other than what they had originally agreed to, because as you start analyzing the data, start solving the problem, you will expose knowledge gaps that they might have had, and you might take the project in a direction they weren't expecting because they didn't fully understand their data. Be that as it may, it's important to stick to the agreement or to modify it with the understanding that modifications will have to be paid for. What clients want versus what they need, usually these are not the same. Clients don't really know what they need for the most part from quantitative projects. Now that could come about because in the past, a previous consultant who was focusing mostly on selling things to the client might have sold them on an approach or a buzzword or a piece of software. And now they really want to be using that software. Or potentially they've heard that their rivals or their competitors are doing something specific and they think they should be doing something similar to what their competitors are doing. Part of your responsibility as a consultant is to give them the advice or what they need, not what they want. The end decision rests with the client. They might decide, even though you've told them what you think they need, that they want what they want, and they'll ask you to give them that service. You have a decision to make then. Do you give them what they want even though you know that this isn't what they need? Or do you walk away? Your responsibility, as I said, is to give advice based on what they need and to make that advice known. If you give them their advice and they decide they still want to go ahead with what they want, well, you can choose to give them what they want. But document the process. Document that you told them that this is what they needed. Because if it turns out that they realize that what they needed and what they wanted weren't the same, you do not want to be the scapegoat. Here's something else that I've learned over the years. Talk is cheap. Some clients are very gregarious. They're full of promises, they're full of ideas, and they'll engage you in the process, but then for whatever reason, they won't respond to the proposal. Or they won't agree to a meeting when you need one. Or they won't make the data available when they said they would make the data available. Or you name it. You shouldn't start to work on a project in earnest until you have an agreement with the client, an official agreement, a signed contract. You can do some work to prepare the eventual work on the project, but don't get in too deep, because if you have no agreement with the client, the work you've done may not get compensated. Some clients are disappearing clients. They will pull out of the process at some stage. That could happen right after the initial contact. They might have gotten in touch with you, you respond to their inquiry, and then you hear nothing. Sometimes you will have gotten the first meeting, gotten an idea as to what the project was about, wrote a proposal to them, and then you hear nothing. Sometimes, even after an agreement has been reached, the project has started, you will suddenly stop hearing from the client. Or when you invoice them, you might stop hearing from the client. That can be quite disturbing. You should withhold the deliverables until you've reestablished contact. Also, spend some time documenting your attempts at reaching the client. Send them emails, keep the emails. If you've made phone calls, log the phone calls. If you've gotten in touch with their supervisors, keep track of that. You're trying to protect yourself in the eventuality that the client will lie about what happened. Eventually, over time, you'll develop a nose for disappearing clients, for flaky clients. One way to avoid a client turning into a flaky client is through regular communication. Of course, if the client disappears at invoicing time, you have some legal recourses, but you should prepare for a long battle. Some clients want to get involved with every single aspect of the project, and they want to tell you how to do everything. You also need to develop a nose for these clients. One way to make things easier is to provide them with nominal work. Get them to do things that you might not necessarily need down the road. The consulting team should be protected from that person's involvement, which can be very distracting. Make sure you put clauses in the proposal that will clearly delineate the responsibilities and roles of each party. Half a lifetime ago, I was a lifeguard. One of the things we were trained to respond to were DNSs, drowning non-swimmers. So we're talking about somebody who doesn't know how to swim and is in a situation where they're literally drowning. You would think that in these cases, it's an emergency, you have to dive in and reach out to the person. But if you do so, the DNS is going to grab onto you with all their might because they're panicking, trying to not go under, and they'll stop your effort to save them, but at the same time, they'll make you drown with them. So instead, what you would do is you would approach them slowly from a distance with a tool or something that floats. And this is what they would grab onto. And then you would pull tool and them to safety. Some clients are DNSs. They are turning to consultant as a last-ditch effort because their project has failed, a deadline is coming, and they are not going to be able to meet it on their own. They need external help and potentially somebody to blame when the project does not meet its goals. You'll be able to recognize that you're in such a situation when you're faced with unreasonable deadlines. They want everything done 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks is not enough time to work on a consulting project. This is going to be super stressful for the consultant team, especially if you have other deliverables on other projects. You need to be clear about the scope of your project, the objectives and the deliverables, and you need to do so as often as is going to be required. You'll have to take out the proposal and the contractual agreement and point out what it is that has been agreed to. This is part of the reason why the wording of your proposal is so important. You don't want to give desperate clients the rope with which to bring you down with them. It feels good when you can come in and save a project. It's good for your ego. But the stress and the high risk of failure probably means that you should not enter into these projects in the first place. Learn to recognize desperate clients. You will encounter some clients that are flat out dishonest. They will try to take advantage of your consultants. It is important for you to do your homework before you start a consulting project. Try to find out about the client before you reach an agreement. Has anybody else worked for the client before? Has anybody lodged a complaint with the Better Business Bureau? There are a few companies that if you were to ask me for my advice about working with them or not, I would say flat out, no, do not. They are crooks. These are few and far between. Most people are not crooks. Trust your instinct. You should protect your team, you should protect yourself. Document your conversations, collect the paper trail. You should do that even if you're working with honest clients. Not because you want to suddenly spring something on them. It's a good habit to take. If there's a problem that arises, contact your lawyer as soon as it does. An important caveat, don't threaten to sue the client unless you are actually ready to do so. If you're bluffing and they call your bluff, you have lost any leverage you might have had. Some clients are very excited about working with you. They have a great project. They have the data. They have the interest and it's not going away. But they have procurement issues. The clients have an internal process to hire consultants. The hiring will take place at the company level, and the project authority on the client side will not be involved with the hiring process. In the private sector, these issues are usually minimal, but in the public sector, there's a number of rules that have been put in place to stamp out corruption, to make it so that you don't hire your brother-in-law. A good reason why these rules are in place, but it can make getting a project off the ground actually difficult. Because of the rules, public service departments tend to try to take a large project and to squeeze it under a small budget. We'd like you to do this, we only have this much money, can you do this for this amount of money? Because the alternative to that is called contract splitting, which is something which is not allowed in the public service. You can't give two contracts for the same project. Don't sell yourself short. If they can only offer $25,000, you should offer $25,000 worth of service, not $50,000. The limits have changed a little bit. It used to be $25,000 with tax. Now it's $40,000 with tax for the first level of the sole source agreements. You might be brought in as well to speak truth to power. It could be that the client already knows what the data is saying, but they actually need somebody from outside the organization to come in and relate the findings to the stakeholders. Perhaps the client is savvy enough to know that the message will be taken more seriously if it comes from outsiders, but there's also a chance that the client knows that the report will be poorly received, and they don't want to be the ones suffering the wrath of the stakeholders, the CEO or the ADM. So you could be brought in as a consultant to basically be the whipping boy or the whipping girl. There's nothing illegal with this. There's nothing wrong with this per se. I personally don't care whether I'm placed in one of these positions, but I know some of my colleagues do not enjoy being set up to fail as they see it. You might not enjoy that. Better to have all the cards on the table so everybody knows why it is that the consulting project has taken place. For a fairly large chunk of the population, quantitative methods are seen as mysterious. And as a result, quantitative consultants are seen as witches and wizards. Often that comes with expectations that cannot be met. Sure, quantitative methods can do a lot of great things, but they can't do everything. You need data, you need to have the right questions, you need the right environment, and even with all of these, you might not be able to answer the questions or solve the problems that the clients have. It is important for consultants to manage these expectations. Let people know what can actually be achieved for real and what cannot. Don't promise things that are unreasonable. You are not helping yourselves or your colleagues if the client is expecting this, and there's no way you can ever, or anybody else could ever give more than this. Communication is key. Time management is difficult in general, but in consulting projects, it's also difficult because the clients will not always be entirely forthcoming about what their own internal deadlines and calendars are when they truly need the project to be done. Now, it could be that their calendars and their deadlines change. Perhaps everything is moved forward a little bit. And they may try, as a result, to move your project deadlines so that they actually coincide with their new project deadlines. It is important for you, whenever you hand in a regular progress report, to remind clients of the timelines for the task, as they've been agreed to in the contract. The clients could come to you and ask you to revisit some of these deadlines, and there's nothing to stop you from doing so if you have the available resources to do so. But the clients shouldn't assume that you will change your deadlines because they have a change in deadline. For the project, the clients may also end up having deliverables. We're expecting them to get back to us in a timely manner, to give us the data by a certain date, and so forth. Your proposal should reflect what the consequences of not meeting the deadlines would be. For instance, you might say, such and such a task will be completed 2 weeks after the data has been delivered by the client, rather than say, task 3 will be completed by October 10th. Because if the client gives you data on October 8th, and your proposal says task 3 will be completed by October 10, guess what? Task 3 has to be completed by October 10. Speaking of which, the data is never as sound as the clients think it is. Ever, ever, ever. And it's very often not even available when it is supposed to be so. There's a lot of internal politics that makes it difficult sometimes to release the data to the consultants. Your proposal should reflect that you are going to spend some time cleaning the data and exploring the data, even if the client tells you that the data is already clean. Okay? Explicitly have a data cleaning and data exploration step in the methodology. You will have to deal with adversity, even when everything is aligned. You did a great job, the clients gave you the domain expertise and good quality data when they were supposed to do so. It's possible that the results of the analysis will not be those that the clients expected, or won't be results that the clients like. They might ask you to redo the work, or they might ask for a refund, and they could put your credentials in doubt. Your proposal should reflect the nature of these projects. The data and the methods do not always support the client's hopes and wishes. This is a fundamental fact of quantitative consulting. If your client does not agree to this fundamental fact, do not enter into a contract with them.